"Leave this community, you monkey. You're not needed." This fake HOA cop slapped my wife and called her a monkey, saying she wasn't meant for this community. I wish I could say I misunderstood what I saw, that there was context, that I walked up at the wrong moment. There wasn't. His hand was still in the air when I stepped out of my truck. My wife stood frozen on our driveway, one hand clutching her stomach, the other half raised like her body didn't know whether to protect itself or our unborn child. Her eyes were wide with shock, not fear yet. Shock, the kind that comes when your brain refuses to accept what just happened. And the man in the dark vest with HOA cop across his chest leaned closer to her and sneered like he owned the ground beneath her feet. "That's what happens," he said, "when monkeys forget their place." Something inside me went very still. Before we dive in, comment which country you're watching from. Let's see how far this story travels. Because to understand how a man thought he could say that to my wife and put his hands on her, you need the backstory. You need to understand the hate that had been building long before I came home that day. We were the only black family in that neighborhood. From the moment we moved in, it was obvious. Smiles that lingered too long. Conversations that stopped when we walked by. Neighbors who waved but never invited us over. It wasn't loud racism. It was the quiet kind. The kind that hides behind rules and community standards. The HOA president, Karen Whitmore, made herself known within the first week. Clipboard tucked under her arm, perfect posture, voice sweet enough to sound reasonable if you didn't listen too closely. She talked about grass height, trash bins, approved colors for front doors, all normal on the surface. But every conversation somehow ended with a reminder that the neighborhood had an image it needed to protect. That image never included us. I was deployed most of the time. Months away, long stretches where my wife was alone in that house, carrying our child, trying to feel safe in a place that never really wanted her there. Karen knew my schedule. She knew when I was gone. That's when the visits increased. Random checks, concerned neighbors, anonymous complaints, too much noise. When my wife was alone inside, improper use of the driveway when her car hadn't moved, unapproved porch furniture, a single chair, always something, always her. When my wife's pregnancy became visible, Karen stopped pretending. She started talking about responsibility, about how children needed the right environment, about how some families weren't a good fit for long-term community harmony. She'd looked directly at my wife's stomach when she said it, like our unborn child was already a violation. We documented everything, emails, dates, photos. We stayed calm. We stayed legal. We refused to be intimidated. That's when Karen escalated. She hired HOA enforcement, not police, not security, just men in tactical vests with radios and attitudes designed to look official enough to scare people who didn't know better. One of them took a special interest in my wife, showing up when she was outside, standing too close, talking too loud. I came home early that day to surprise her. I wanted to take her out, remind her she wasn't alone, tell her I was here now. Instead, I stepped out of my truck just in time to watch a grown man slap my pregnant wife and call her an animal over a fake HOA violation, saying she stole an HOA member's money. That was the excuse. The real reason was written all over his face. Confidence, cruelty, and the belief that no one would stop him. He didn't know I was home. He didn't know who I was. And as I took my first step toward him, I realized something with absolute clarity. This wasn't an HOA issue anymore. This was personal. And he had just crossed the line he would never be able to step back over. He finally noticed me. The fake HOA cop turned, that smug confidence still glued to his face, and lifted his hands like he was about to explain himself, like this was a misunderstanding he could talk his way out of. "She stole it," he said quickly, pointing back at my wife without even looking at her. "HOA member funds." He never finished the sentence. My fist connected with his jaw with a sound that didn't belong in a quiet neighborhood. Not a shout, not a crack, something dull and final. His head snapped sideways and his words died mid-breath as his feet slid backward on the concrete. I didn't stop. I stepped in and hit him again, harder this time. His knees buckled, but I grabbed the front of his vest and kept him upright, driving another punch into his face, then another. Each one landed with precision, fueled by months of rage, fear, and everything I'd swallowed while I was gone. He tried to raise his arms. They didn't listen. I felt bone shift under my knuckles. Felt his weight sag as his balance left him completely. When I finally released him, he collapsed onto the driveway like his body had forgotten how gravity worked. He should have stayed down. Instead, he groaned and tried to roll. That's when something in me snapped open. I dropped on him, pinning his shoulders with my knees and kept punching. Short, heavy strikes. Not wild, not sloppy, controlled and relentless. His head bounced once against the concrete. His body went limp, but I didn't notice right away. Someone screamed. Not my wife, a neighbor. Then another voice shouted my name. Someone grabbed my arm. I shook them off without even realizing it. Another punch landed. Then another. He's out. Someone yelled. He's unconscious. I hit him again. Hands grabbed me from behind. 2 neighbors this time, pulling hard, dragging me backward off his body. I fought it for a second before the sound of my wife crying cut through everything. I stopped. The man lay completely still. His face already swelling, jaw sitting wrong, chest rising shallow and uneven. He wasn't responding. Not to voices, not to movement, not to anything. Someone nearby said they thought he wasn't breathing right. Another neighbor was already on the phone with 911, voice shaking as they tried to explain what had just happened. Someone else grabbed towels, pressing them against his ribs when they realized how badly he'd been hurt. I backed away slowly, hands trembling now, not with rage, but with the sudden weight of reality crashing in. I went to my wife. She was shaking so hard her knees nearly gave out when I reached her. I wrapped my arms around her carefully, feeling her cling to me like she was afraid to let go. Her cheek was red where he'd hit her. Her breathing was shallow. I'm here, I kept saying. I've got you. Sirens cut through the air a minute later. First distant, then close enough to echo off the houses. Red and blue lights spilled across the street. I raised my hand slowly and stayed exactly where I was as patrol cars screeched to a stop and officers poured out. Behind me, the fake HOA cop still hadn't moved. And as paramedics rushed toward him, one of them muttered something I'll never forget. Head trauma. Severe. He's not waking up anytime soon. That's when it hit me. This wasn't just a beating. This was about to become something much bigger. If you're enjoying this HOA story so far, like and subscribe because the story is only going to get better. Another officer knelt beside my wife, checking her face, her breathing, her stomach, asking about the baby, asking if she'd been struck anywhere else. I stayed where I was, hands open, feet planted, no resistance. I did this, I said before anyone asked. I'll cooperate. They cuffed me anyway. Not roughly, not aggressively. Procedure. A man lay broken on my driveway, and I wasn't pretending otherwise. As they guided me toward the cruiser, one of the officers asked, "Sir, do you have identification?" My wallet's in my back pocket. He retrieved it, opened it, and everything changed. Active duty, United States Navy. The officer didn't say a word. He handed it to his sergeant, who read it once, then looked at my wife, then back at me. Then they uncuffed me and the tone shifted immediately. Paramedics loaded the fake HOA cop onto a stretcher. His jaw was shattered, multiple ribs broken, severe head trauma. One medic shook his head quietly and said, "We need to move now." He was rushed to the hospital. Doctors later confirmed he slipped into a coma shortly after arrival due to swelling in the brain. That was the only time that word ever mattered because everything else was already decided by evidence. 3 neighbor security cameras, a doorbell camera across the street, the HOA enforcement vehicle's dash cam, and half a dozen phones held by witnesses. They had the slap, the slur, the accusation, the beating, calling her a monkey, and the neighbors pulling me off an unconscious man. There was no missing context, no alternate angle, no version where my wife was at fault. The investigation moved fast. The fake HOA cop was charged with felony assault, hate crime enhancement, impersonation of authority, false accusation of theft, aggravated harassment of a pregnant woman. He was sentenced to 25 years in prison effective the moment he woke up from the coma. And once he woke up, he talked. He handed over messages, emails, voice recordings, all from Karen Whitmore, telling him to make her uncomfortable, saying my wife didn't fit the image, reminding him I was never home, saying she couldn't stand living close to a monkey. Karen was arrested 2 days later. She was charged with conspiracy, civil rights violations, solicitation of unlawful enforcement, and hate-based harassment. She lost her position, lost her license, and was sentenced to 6 years in prison along with $200,000 in civil damages paid to my family. The HOA dissolved under investigation. And my wife, she never stepped foot in that neighborhood again. Our child was born healthy, safe, protected. And every time I think back to that driveway, to that hand in the air, to that word he thought gave him power, I remember this. The moment he touched my wife, he stopped being protected by rules. What do you think, folks? Did I do the right thing, or did I do what any husband would have done in that situation? What would you have done? I'd love to know.